Welcome back to the stage.
Sorry to my parents.
Your family's in the audience, right?
Yeah.
This is their first time seeing it? Yes. Let's start. I wanted to start actually with the first image in the movie because I think that there's such great kind of evocative, suffocating imagery in this movie that it pairs beautifully with the shot towards the end where he's in the bathroom, seemingly something along those lines. And I'm curious, where that came from, that kind of suffocating nature of that imagery for you.
Well, I like to call the images like in fabric, like my artsy fartsy shots. Like I think those are the images that are kind of easy to contextualize within this larger framework of just like.
Sorry, that's the AC.
Oh, okay. Like deep notions of just like feeling. So we can have them, but mostly it was just like I had Ian going about like making an Airbnb. Like we just filmed him doing that. And it just so happened that it looked quite beautiful being like, I don't know, like behind this draping. And obviously there's this idea of obscuring, there's this idea of like layers that come into play, but that was about it, yeah. Like, and also then my editor said, oh, this is very similar to Lynn Ramsey's opening image of Ratcatcher. And so then I watched that and I saw that how that played in. That was also very cool. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think mostly I just, I think there are certain there are certain like formulas that make good images, which is like light and then like curtains make usually very beautiful images.
So, I was also curious about ASMR as kind of a metaphor in the movie, and I was like, where did that come from? Was that early on in the script? Was that did you find it somewhere along the way?
Yeah, well, I had really bad insomnia during college, and then that's also like when ASMR started becoming popular, and so that was like our kind of organic Venn diagram of interests. But yeah, I always liked it. I always thought it was super weird. Like it was like so strange. I used to take Ambien, and there would be times where I'd stay up while I was on Ambien, and I'd like watch this woman like caressing the screen, and be like, this is a strange thing to be happening.
Right.
Like this is weird that someone's being paid to do this, but also awesome. And I liked the idea of intimacy as power, I think. And that was sort of how this idea got started, was the idea of how does one utilize intimacy as a tool of, I don't know, not necessarily manipulation, but one of like commodification in some way.
Right. We were also talking about, another thing that I think that the film does so beautifully is show examples and utilizes microaggressions and how it plays into their relationship. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about that, about the role of microaggressions in the movie.
Yeah, well, for me, I think I say race in the movie functions as a specter in the same way as it does in like Julius Caesar.
Right.
It's not there, but everyone's kind of maybe anticipating it if they're aware of its presence, and then suddenly it's there and you have to deal with it.
Right.
And I think that's the way I like to deal with race in movies, which is that, I am half Chinese and, I don't look white at all, but like it's not something that I want like my identity to rule my everyday life, but then sometimes it does, and when it does, it really comes in. And so I like that idea of suddenly like this presence that maybe you've been thinking the whole time, like, does it exist, does it not? Is she like, is this a part of her? Is this important or something that becomes really important to her? And yeah, I think that's where it comes into play. I think also obviously the sex scene with Kristen and Adam is is meant to be really uncomfortable.
Right.
You know, I think it's meant to address a lot of things I think people feel really uncomfortable to talk about right now, which is like how people weaponize sex as power, how people weaponize their like greater, you know, role in a relationship to their advantage in a romantic relationship, and how all those things come into play. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's where microaggressions come into play, and probably in a lot of different ways I'm not even acknowledging in this, but people are seeing in the film.
Yeah. I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions? Right here.
Yeah, I just was totally impressed by how boldly uncomfortable so many of the scenes were. Like, it's just like it was so honest about like how difficult relationships are, and how in denial certain people are about their own rage, like, and how they take it out on their partner. So I guess the general question is like, what inspired you to depict so nakedly flaws and tensions that people experience in relationships?
So the question, just to summarize for the back of the room, was what inspired you to kind of depict very nakedly and very boldly these flaws in relationships and the general tension in relationships?
Well, I think I like to write scripts that are like petri dishes for different, I don't know, phenomena. And something I actually read in a Rachel Cusk essay recently is that all arguments are a war of self-definition. And I think that resonates a lot with me in terms of how I feel about the work I do, which is trying to sort of maybe anthropologically assess like modern day relationships. And I think one of them with me inside of a leading role being like these really sort of like tenuous, I don't know, relationships between like liberal dynamics of identity crises and wanting to be free but not, and then also like someone like me who's like super racially ambiguous but also like embodying like, you know, a lot of the worlds of a person of color, how all of these things interact like together. I don't know, sorry, this is not being super helpful, but basically the ways in which like we all come together to like try and figure out how to maybe like create amends and not, and how that can be interesting, I guess.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, I guess for me in particular, I'm always trying to create work that's for like a woman of color, and also trying to create work that's about how a woman of color, like myself, can exist in the world in a way that doesn't have to feel so reliant on other people, and how they can feel, I don't know, like emboldened to explore like their lives in a way that feels like they can just be themselves.
Yeah. Right here.
I really liked it. It is awkward. It's horribly awkward, and it's so wonderful. It's just really good. But I was wondering two things, like how much is it just based on something that really happened? And two, what did you learn about directing yourself in a piece?
So the two questions were, and to the extent that you're comfortable answering this, how much of it was autobiographical or based on something that really happened? And what did you learn about yourself directing in the film?
None of it's autobiographical. None of it really happened to me. I mean, I think things that happen to me are like certain, yeah, like, I don't know, certain like ways of interacting with different people, but besides that, nothing really was autobiographical. But I think, yeah, nothing autobiographical. Sorry, what was the other question?
The other thing was, what did you learn about yourself?
What did I learn about myself? Yes. I learned, I like how much people would be like comfortable in the specificity, because you always learn in film school like the specificity becomes universal, which is kind of feels like bullshit when you're in homeschool, because you're like, oh God, who cares about my like?
Well, it's like a fortune cookie, right?
Yeah,
in,
it's like,
in a way
who cares
that
about my life?
until you apply it, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, like you're like, who cares about my life at all? And I'm like, I'm fine with that. But I think like really leaning into it, just trying to make something that I don't know, I felt like resonated with me really like emotionally, somehow like I don't know, like traverse other planes to get to be like, I don't know, relatable to other people. So I think that's what it was. But yeah, I don't know. It was very difficult to try and get to that place.
Did you spend time thinking about that while working on it, or were you kind of like, what's the truth of this character, and then hoping the truth would relate because you made the truth of each character?
Well, I mean, I think it's like, I feel like I try to write characters who I feel like everyone knows.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knows Ben.
Yeah.
Even if you don't
know
him,
yeah.
like you know of him.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the whole point. It's like we're trying, like, I'm not trying to like write people who like deviate from some sort of archetype. I'm trying to write people who everyone understands,
Right.
and therefore maybe can understand the other people who are, you know, affected by them, but also like swayed by them better. Yeah.
Yep. Right here. Yep.
I'm just curious, like as you're starring in it and directing, so like what's your process like? Who do you turn to say like that was a good take? You know?
Yeah. What is your process starring in it and directing? Is it do you turn to someone to say it's a good take? Do you watch it back?
No, I never watch playback.
Okay.
And also, this is the best advice I feel like I can give anyone who's, if you are trying to act in your own film, do not do playback. I swear to you, that's the death of an actor and the death of a director.
Because you think about it too much once you do?
It's just the death of an actor is self-consciousness.
Right.
And, like, I don't know, a reliance on a self that no longer exists. Like, when you look at yourself played back, you're looking at a self that no longer exists. And you have to let go of that.
I'm curious, do you have that same experience in editing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do that in the sense that, like, you cannot think of that as you. You have to think of it as someone else completely separate from you.
Right.
But yeah, I think the best advice I can give is like, yeah, when I'm acting, I don't do playback. I don't look back on any takes. And there are some really hard, like, I don't know, hard judgments you have to make. Like, there are takes where you're like, oh my God, I look so bad. Holy shit. But it's the best take for a performance, so that's what we're using. Okay, like, let's do it. And that's kind of awesome in some ways, because you're like, oh wow, my ego and myself as this woman who, I guess in every other way you're like, is like, that's completely related to my values, thrown out the window. And some of these other things takes the foreground, which is cool and empowering. But yes, so it's really hard. But yeah, I don't look at playback. I think for acting, it's just a reliance on your producer and everyone else in your team to say, you know, these are the takes that feel authentic to the way you look at the world and the way that we're looking at the story. Yeah, and that's how you have to do it. But yeah, I think most of the time when I was acting, you just have to really give it your all. And if someone says, on anyone on your team really, like higher up says, this is what I felt and it felt inauthentic or it felt wrong for whatever reason, then we'll go back and do it again. Yeah.
Any other like films or stories or artists that like inspired this film?
So the question was about other films or stories or artists that inspired this film?
I mean, not millions, thousands, but hundreds. Elaine May, the OG sort of writer, director, actress, is always going to be inspiration for me. Miranda July, Lena Dunham, Marin Ade, Joanna Arnow, who also showed her film here.
Yeah.
All amazing. In terms of like individual films that inspired this, Tom Noonan's What Happened Was a really inspirational work of both theater and film for me. Carnage also, maybe not so much the Roman Polanski, but the play itself was really inspiring. I think I was really inspired by works that just try to get into both the tenderness and the brutality of the relationship, and how those can coincide and then also do battle with each other.
We have time for a couple more. I'm going to go back there. Yeah.
I just was curious in the very ending scene, what was going through Tessa's head when she's on the sidewalk before, when Ben is expecting her to collar those emotions that she was going through?
So the question was, what's going through Tessa's head in the very last scene while she's on the sidewalk?
Yeah, I wish
If you want to answer that.
No, I wish I had a better answer, but the thing is, when I write, I abandon my character the second I abandon them on the page. Like, I don't know. And what it was happening in my head when I was doing that scene was I was just playing through a lot of the things that were happening in the scenes that you witnessed before and thinking about it. But I don't like to think about epilogues, and I don't like to think about like backstories for characters. I think it's really hindering to characters. Like, I think characters are so.
Sorry.
I think characters are so interesting when they can just exist as that, and so I don't like to do anything before or after their story. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for it, but I think whatever mental state you're in is probably, indicative of what will happen to the characters, but I don't know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, do you have any fan fiction?
Well, so I was gonna say, so after my first premiere at South by, someone was like, what happens at the end? I just Googled like fan theories, this closeness, and I was like, you are the fan theory, you have to make it.
You're the first person to watch this movie.
I have no other people who will tell you anything, but if anyone has fan theories, please write them, but I'll be curious to see them. Thank you.
Right here.
Okay. Hey, first, great film. Very, very much enjoyed it. So I was intrigued by your choice to include Lily as a theme, and especially them coming back for their high school reunion, and how the different characters had different relationships with like the smallness of the city, and how like some of them felt very close to it over time. Some of them like distanced themselves, or your character at least didn't feel very attached to their childhood. So I was wondering like what made you want to explore that theme, because I know that's like a very common thing for people to experience. So yeah.
So just to summarize, the question was about the role of Philly in the movie and the different characters' relationships to it and coming back and exploring their attachment to their childhood.
That's a really good question. So I went to Central High School in Philly, and I feel like it had this sort of cult-like following, and that was super interesting to explore, because I don't know, I just love characters like that. I love characters who are devoted to something, because I'm not devoted to anything. So for me, when I see people who are devoted to something, it's like incredibly fascinating, especially to something that during a time in my life I was like extremely depressed and extremely apathetic. So that's kind of where it comes from. But I feel like the more that I thought about my adolescence in Philly, the more I really I felt like this love for my the fervor surrounding it, and how much of, I don't know, my life. I guess the thing is like, I got asked this question at this other film festival that was like, what do you feel about people who feel really strongly about your adolescence, and I said, well, you know, actually, I think I kind of envy them because they feel this extremely strong fervor and passion. And that's kind of all what being an artist is just feeling an extreme passion and excitement for points in your life and allowing the novelty of emotion to be present always. And I think somehow by these people being so excited by high school, they've allowed that joie de vivre to constantly seep into their lives, or maybe I haven't. And I think in some ways I felt really, jealous of them.
Yeah. Do you feel like setting it where you are from is kind of like, it's like wish fulfillment in a way where you're like...
But also I just think these characters are so specific. Like, going to high school in New York even is very different than going to high school in Philly. Going to high school in Philly is such going to high school in Philly an experience. And you know what I mean if you know what I mean. Like, it is. And so I think it felt important to set it there and to have these potent emotions. I don't know, I liked the idea of making it feel so Philly in some ways, even if it wasn't present to other people. For a Philly audience, the whole central thing and the weird school song that we sort of massacre is like a version of the school song we have, and I pray to God Central doesn't sue me, and I hope they don't have the money to, but yes, I don't think they do, but yeah, that's
you should
part of
screen
it.
it there.
Oh dear God. But yeah, that's part of it.
I think we have time for one more. I'll go right here in the center in the back.
I was just curious about how the ASMR elements came in. Were those something that started at the script level, or were there something you kind of got into later? Also, how did you learn how to do it afterwards, or were you already kind of experienced? You listened to it a lot already.
So we kind of covered this earlier, but do you come to it with some experience in doing ASMR?
Oh no. So there was this one ASM artist in particular I really liked called It Splits. Mini Z's at the end. And she was sort of a huge, inspirational sort of module for me for when I was trying to do these ASMR videos. But yeah, she was a big launching point for me. ASMR is such an interesting thing that I still feel like isn't explored as much in film as it should be. Because it's I call it a hack. It's sort of a hack to get to some kind of more emotional core of the senses more easily, and I don't know. I just I find it fascinating. I'm curious as to how it'll evolve, and I know that the New York Times has done some pieces about this is ASMR in film, but never really in this way where it's just trying to kind of get your muscles to loosen up and go crazy. But yeah, I don't know. I really love ASMR, and I'm curious to see how it progresses in the future of film and TV.
Well, I think we have to wrap up, but I want to thank Kit for coming and sharing the film with us, and I want to thank you guys for being here.